another, despite the presence of many colleagues from Oman and so on, we didn't have the experience. So I would like to know, you raised the issue of urban identity, which is not, we have multi-identities in the cities like Dubai and so on, and Doha. So have you ever visited the city of Muscat, or you had an idea about the experience of Muscat? Are we going to have, for example, in the future, instead of Dohaization or Dubaization, to Muscatization? I don't know. Because we feel that there was too much pressure of global cities and so on, and so many issues. So I don't know if you have any idea about this city.
شكرا دكتور. مداخلات. أستاذ علوي تفضل. هنا أستاذة.
هناك.
أو نعم هناك في.
السلام عليكم، شكرا لكم على هذه الأوراق القيمة.
Very,
أنا
very
لي
rich
تعقيب.
papers. I have a comment on concentrating on the material side of the cities, which is the forms and also the towers, the number of floors and so on. This is a very important aspect. It has to be covered. But there are some other things that have to do with the human capital, with the culture, interactions amongst people, and this is absent. And also things to do with language, identity, culture in the city. And there are some other aspects that are related to how people view these spaces. The professor talked about Muscat and Muscatization, if there is a possibility of having such thing. Muscat has a number of attributes. So Muscat, most of the buildings are mid-rise. We're talking about 7 to 8 floors. And Muscat, we have 70 to 80% of citizens, they own their own buildings or their own houses. Doesn't mean that economically they're doing better than other GCC citizens. No, but this is something that is part and parcel of their feelings, of their sense of belonging. Muscat is also the neighborhoods, they have what is called a diwania. So we have a diwania, which is a kind of a place where people gather together. But we have what is called a sabla al-amma, which does not exist in many, many GCC countries. This is not linked to any political power. People in neighborhoods, in areas of the city, they have their own areas where they can gather as a third place. And this is closer to mosques and so on. So Muscat as a city has not been fully discovered. I think it is worthy of research and discovery. We know a lot about cities of the North African, the Andalusian aspects that we see in the architecture of those cities. We know a lot about the Levant, but Muscat perhaps is not very much known to so many people, and it is incumbent on us to perhaps make it known to others. Sometimes ignorance is a blessing sometimes. So in light of all these examples, the prevailing examples that we see about globalized cities, perhaps sometimes we need to cover to these cities and not make them known to other people. So more and more interventions, readings of the situation. Sophia from the Arab Center. I have a general remark about cities in the GCC, the pathway. Perhaps this is going to be relevant to this session and the sessions that we listened to or attended in the morning and yesterday. There are concepts, terms that are used interchangeably. For instance, old heritage, past architecture, these are used interchangeably as if they mean the same meaning. We would like to see a kind of a conceptual reflection when we mean something is traditional, something is popular, something is old, something is part of the heritage. So we just need to know the relationship between these different kind of concepts when we link them to political interventions. Some people talk about something as being heritage, and it should be used as such. So it seems that there are relationship of strength and power that give legitimacy to certain concepts and creates relationship between these concepts and the users of these concepts in general, normal citizens, whether this person has a passport or not. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Hassan. Microphone, please. So we're going to move forward, right, left, up, down, try to give the floor to as many people as possible. At the outset, I would like to commend the remark that was expressed by Mr. Alawi. The fact that we do not have enough research in our forum about aspects such as cultural and social. Perhaps we concentrated on urban development, urban globalized explosion in those cities, but we did not ponder and think about the social and cultural makeup of those cities. I think we need to allocate one whole forum to study these aspects that are very important indeed. The valuable paper that was presented by Dr. Safa when she talked about the coastal eastern cities or coastal cities in Saudi Arabia, in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. I hoped that perhaps the presenter tried to shine light on the formation of these cities. These are new cities compared to old cities in Saudi Arabia, in Hijaz or Najd. These are modern cities that have been established after the advent of oil. So perhaps when we concentrate on Dubai a great deal, but we did not concentrate on Ad-Dammam and Al-Khubar, these have very particular attributes. This is a very important topic. So the paper talked about environmental aspects. Yes, I understand, but perhaps it would have been useful to shine light on the fact that these cities contributed to the formation of Saudi Arabian identity. Aramco attracted the citizens from different regions of Saudi Arabia and broke this disconnect between the different regions in Saudi Arabia and reinforced this kind of close ties and relationship between these people coming from different parts of Saudi Arabia. And this applies also to Bahrain. Bahrain, despite the fact that it is a small country, but the oil company was able to bring about people from different parts of Bahrain, particularly when all the workers at the time used to be Bahrainis. So I just wanted to concentrate on this particular point. And why do we have an environmental challenge in the coastal area, particularly? Yes, oil companies, that is right. Dr. Mansour, go ahead. And after that, Dr. Haider. Thank you very much. So at last I'm given the opportunity to take the floor. Professor Kamraba, السؤال لكم هل
about
بإمكاننا
Middle East cities. You touched that in different ways, but I think there are cities in the Middle East. The metropolis of the Arab world was Jerusalem until 1967. Okay, even before 67, before the Nakba, before 48, the metropolis of the whole region was Jerusalem. Even Gulf visits and airplanes to the international airport of Jerusalem existed until 67. So how do you read that? Also in comparison to the role of Cairo, Damascus, Beirut, is that part of the discussion, or we created only the whole discussion about those Gulf new cities that existed basically in the 1960s or 70s, but there are original cities that are connected to each other as well. And I think universities, the institutions, Al-Azhar, Baghdad, where are these in terms of your debate? I think you are one of the specialists, and I have read much of your work, and I'm really happy to hear your voice. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور منصور. اعذرني أنا لا أرى بس الدكتور الذي يجلس بجانب الدكتور حارث.
The person sitting next to Dr. Harith, the person sitting next to Dr. Harith. If you can introduce yourself, please. عقيل عباس, my name. سؤالي هو للدكتورة سمونة بخصوص دبي.
It's an important topic. How do we have a well-integrated city? Your methodical approach was about fragmentation, and usually fragmentation points to some sort of original unity that got broken down and became self-contained, and no part communicates with the other. Is that what happened? I mean, is this the right approach? Is it fragmentation, or are we talking about asymmetrical development of cities under specific economic conditions, probably state-sponsored? We can talk about even European Western cities that lost this sense of organic integration. Is this part of development, industrial, commercial development? I'm not sure fragmentation is the way to approach this. I'd just like to hear some of your reflections, why you use the fragmentation per se. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور عاقل. مهدي تفضل. سنكتفي بمهدي. هل هناك أحد يريد أن يداخل أو يوجه أي سؤال قبل أن نغلق باب التساؤلات والمداخلات؟ وإذا نكتفي بك يا مسك الختام.
شكرا يا مسك تيسير. هو سؤال تقريبا لكل المتحدثين بصفة عامة. النقاشات المتحدثة
discussions about globalization and the Gulf city that you've mentioned reminded me of an important article by Lee Harvey and David Munzini about the expansion of the Gulf city. The idea that I would like to get across here is that what you've said is more or less part of a vision that was in this article that talks about these solutions that are done by the authorities in the Gulf cities are kind of an attempt to shift the attention of the community, the international community, not the Western community, the international community. And there was references to these methods in many cities, other cities. My question here, through the research papers that you've presented, is there a case where the authority deems these comments about their methods and in their pursuit for this architecture at an international level? I mean, is there an attempt to preserve the heritage and restore its value in a context of a community that preserves the nature of this community? Thank you for everyone for adhering to the time. We have 15 minutes, 5 minutes to each speaker to comment and to answer the questions that were asked by the attendees. Please start. أود أن أبدأ بشكر أعضاء الجمهور على ملاحظاتهم العميقة وأسئلتهم، وتحديدا أود أن أشكرك دكتور على تسليط الضوء على
covering also the social aspects when we discuss about cities, which is not only merely a physical kind of growth or development. Coming to the question about fragmentation, thank you very much indeed. Maybe I agree with you, this is not the correct term, and thanks for maybe like highlighting how we should call what is happening in Dubai and in other Gulf cities, like lack of organic integration. My point was to try to raise the issue that what we experience as Dubai residents, it's a development of the city in many different levels. That it's kind of like islands within islands, or like bubbles that sometimes resonate or overlap or try to integrate, but very frequently kind of coexist side by side in different levels. So I was discussing about the physicality, the physical fragmentation of the city, but most importantly the social component of it. So once again, if we think about the city, more than 200 nationalities, very, very different income status, very, very different social background, cultural background, religious background. It's a nice place to live again, but the overall idea that I wanted to share is this coexistence of different bubbles. Yes.
شكرا دكتورة. تفضل دكتورة صفاء. ولك دقيقتين زيادة اللي أخذناها منك.
أخذنا تمام. يعني هو الصحيح ملاحظات الإخوة تثري البحوث.
Colleagues really enrich our research papers. When the doctor said about Muscat, it appears there are many models and examples that are worthy of studying. And when we are presented with other examples, we recall more. I recall the city of Amman. Of course, this conference is about Gulf cities, but the city of Amman is worthy of studying. It is a city that has inflation in the population and economic activities, and this is an unnatural inflation. Inflation is not related to the development, it's related to the migration into Amman. We have received refugees in 48 and 67, and also after we've absorbed all these shocks and we try to have a balance with our resources, we had influx in the 1990, 1991, 1992 from Iraq. Of course, there were capitals along with the influx of refugees, which boosted the economy in Jordan. However, it created inflation in Jordan. Also, the return of Palestinians and Jordanians from Kuwait. Of course, they returned with capitals, but they've created problems with Jordanians. Suddenly, the prices of real estate shot up in a way that is not in line or completely at odds with their income. Jordan tried to absorb this shock and create balance between the resources and the population. But in 2011, the influx of Syrian refugees came, and it was really shocking. Right now, what is announced or official is 1.3 million refugees. Jordan is a state that does not have resources. Amman has been inflated, and Amman is described by visitors as a city of an oil landscape, but without oil. So it has a revolution, an economic revolution, but without the oil. There is a decision right now by the Jordanian government to establish a new capital because there is no more solution. Right now, there is an administrative capital announced by the former government, by Hani al-Mulki. It was suspended because of the reshuffle, but right now, His Majesty has recommended the restudying of the new city as a solution. So the example of Muscat, the example of Amman, there are so many examples in the Arab world that are worthy of studying. Another point, we talked a lot about the landscape, the economic landscape of the cities and the accumulation of the capital, and we didn't talk about the social landscape, even though in our papers we talked about the social challenges facing the populations and the gaps among the populations. But as Dr. said, we need independent research papers for the social impact. Again, I thank Dr. Hassan for shifting the attention to points that are worthy of consideration. Thank you, Dr. Mehran. شكرا جزيلا لكم. نعم، لقد زرت مسقط وهي واحدة من مدني المفضلة في العالم.
Compare Muscat and Dubai. It's like comparing apples and oranges. I think it's important to remember that Dubai, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Neom and Muka'ab and these places are meant for nation building. Nation building. Oman doesn't need nation building. Oman is a nation, it's a natural nation. Oman has been around for centuries. There's a different set of dynamics, historical trajectories at work. There is something called the Dubai model that has been, for better or for worse, becoming widespread since the 1990s. And Muscatization, unfortunately, isn't occurring because the rulers in UAE, rulers in Qatar, rulers in Bahrain need to create nations. And this goes to the second question about heritage and the last question. History is made by victors. They're the ones who determine what concepts mean. And these are the victors, history writers, are the ones who determine what heritage is and what heritage means. So there's a deliberate attempt in a place like Qatar, in a place like the UAE, in a place like Saudi Arabia, to create heritage. And if you disagree with it, there's a price to be paid. So heritage, like many other concepts, is politically dictated in places like this. And so I think that's critically important to keep in mind. Again, Oman doesn't need nation building. There was a question Dr. Hassan, I believe, asked about cities in the East. And I mentioned that there's a huge debate among scholars. Asad Abu Khalil, who writes a blog called The Angry Arab, has really delved into this and has gotten into this with Sultan al-Qasimi, who's an Emirati, art collector or commentator, public intellectual of sorts, who argues that these are the new centers of the Middle East, and Asad Abu Khalil points to the other direction. One of my favorite Arab sayings is, Egyptians write, Lebanese publish, Iraqis read. And those of us who teach here know, unfortunately, that we're not operating in a reading culture or a publishing culture or a writing culture, for that matter, because political dictates mitigate against intellectual innovation and intellectual enterprises of other kinds. So I think a lot of it depends on how you define what criteria you use. If you use airports and seaports and fleet of airplane, no doubt Qatar Airways and Emirates and Etihad by far outweigh the old legacy airlines of the region. Qatar National Library any day trumps any of the libraries in Baghdad and elsewhere. But I think, I think we need to be careful about, or we need to be attentive to what criteria we use to compare these places. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا. أظن نحن وصلنا إلى نهاية هذا
the end of this nice session which has grouped us with you. Thank you. Let's take a short break and then we will resume the rest of our agenda. Thank you.